Ricky David needs another one, I think. And Beanie needs one too. Anybody else? Good deal. All right. I've got marked that we're going to be looking on the bottom of page number 3. We've covered some of this as we began this study on Wednesday evening. And of course, we're attempting to use some, not all, but some of the questions that Jesus asked to see just exactly what's involved in a proper communication process, realizing that a master teacher, if we follow his example, and of course not only the way that he lived and not only the way that he acted and not only the way he thought, but also the way that he communicated God's will to others, then we know that we're on firm footing for that. You know, I thought when Rob, how come I can't remember that name? Rob. It sounds like something you do to somebody and you're trying to take their money or something. But anyhow, when he was here and he made the observation that when a person asks you a question, you don't have to answer the question. Okay? And of course, it's not that you're scared to answer or you can't answer the question. Now, sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's not the proper time to answer the question. And so you push that question off to a future time in which that question will, in fact, be answered. And of course, in the study that he presented to us and showed us how, and we're actually going through that material on Sunday evening, then just about any and every question that a person might ask while you're going through that material, the material ends up answering it, and you don't even really have to, you see. It actually, through the development of that material, then just about every question that would come up in a Bible discussion like that is, in fact, answered. And if it's not, you know, I mean, I'll make a notation of the question that's asked, and then I'll say, now, if the rest of this material don't cover that, then we'll find an answer to it after we get done with this study, but I'm pretty confident that it will be covered. So Jesus was a question asker. Of course, that's not the only way that he taught. Sometimes what we would commonly refer to today, he lectured. In other words, he says, I'm going to speak, you're going to sit there and listen, you know. Now, there's something to be said for that. Evidently, that's at least one way to teach, maybe not the best way to teach, but Jesus did teach that way from time to time, so sometimes that is a proper thing to do. And, of course, that's basically what happens when you're listening to a sermon, is there's a teaching involved, but there's no communication from the audience most of the time, other than a frown or a sticky tongue out at the preacher or something like that, you know. And that has happened before, believe it or not. So when you see Jesus in all these different circumstances, we're going to be able to see just exactly what our responsibility ought to be in those same particular circumstances. And, of course, in principle, some of the things, of course, as far as the area in which he was dealing with people and their backgrounds and all, the specifics of it will not necessarily apply, but the principle will apply regardless of what time frame we're talking about. And so down here in number 10 on the bottom of page number 3, it says he encouraged, and of course this is Roger Campbell's material. He put this together a number of years ago, and then he finally got it published here just a few years ago, or maybe last year or the year before. But notice what he says. He encouraged, even challenged his listeners to think, to reason for themselves. And the reason why he did that is he actually thought that people could actually take in information, think about it, reason with it, and draw a conclusion about it. Isn't that amazing? You see, the Lord expected people to use their minds, to use their intellectual abilities, even though their intellectual abilities may be challenged in many areas. When it comes to so many areas that we're confronted with in life, most of them doesn't matter. You know, whether our intellect is challenged to figure out various things that go on in the world, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to spiritual truth, then we have to understand it. And by design, God has provided his will in such a way that we can understand it if we're willing to put the work necessary into it to reason and to come to the conclusion that the evidence demands. That's simply the law of rationality. We expect it in every area of our lives. We expect doctors that follow this rule. We expect pharmacists that follow. We expect anybody and everybody that we come in contact with from day to day to reason and think the same way. Well, why should it be any different when it comes to spiritual truth? Think about it. And so that's one of the bases for some of these questions, and we'll see that when we get to them. And then number 11. He took into account the learning level or ability of his listeners. And of course, the passage here that he mentions is when Jesus in John chapter 16 at verse 12 says, I have many things to say to you, but you're not able to hear them right now, so I'm not going to tell you. You know, it wouldn't have done any good at all for him to have told them then what he wanted to tell them, because they wouldn't have got it, see? Now, he knew that. He knew perfectly their level of understanding. Now, we can't do that, you know. We might suppose, you know, that we know the level a person's in, and there may be some indication by various answers that they might give to various things as to their present level, and based upon that, we have to make a determination as to what we present to them, you know. In a congregation this size, or even in a class this size, there's all different levels of understanding of the Scriptures. There are those who only have a surface understanding of the Scriptures, while there are others who have a deep, in-depth study of the Scriptures that comes as a result of studying for many, many years, of being dedicated to knowing the truth and applying the truth in various circumstances. And the Lord realized there were different levels of people like that too. Everybody is not at the same place when it comes to understanding what their responsibility is to God. One of the examples that I was shown many, many years ago was, and I've used this in sermons before, where if somebody is traveling in the state of Tennessee and trying to ultimately make it to Memphis, okay? Well, when a person is in Knoxville, or let's start back, let's make him in Bristol, you know. A person starts off in Bristol going to Memphis. If he pulls into the service station and says, how far is, this is before there's any such thing as a map on your car, you know, or your phone or whatever. It don't work if you got one of them. But this, you got to stop at the service station to find out. And the service station attendant says, well, it's so many miles to Memphis. Okay, you say, okay. Well, then you get on down the road on 40 and you make your way to Knoxville and you stop and ask the same question, you're going to get a different answer, aren't you? And the reason why you get a different answer is because you're at a different place now, see? And the same principle holds true relative to understanding God's will for mankind. Some of us may be still in Bristol. Others are at Knoxville. Some's in Nashville. Some's all the way to Jackson. And some's on the outskirts of Memphis. They're just about to get there, but they're not there yet, see? And we have examples in the Bible of all types of individuals who fit into those categories, see? And we know they fit in those categories based upon what inspired men told them they need to do. Now, here you got the example in Acts chapter 22, verse 16, where Saul of Tarsus is told, and now why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Now, comparatively speaking, think about this. Along the road to salvation, when Ananias